The medical bay of the Eternal Chorus was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of healing machines and diagnostic displays. Seo-hyun sat in a chair beside the bed where Minjin lay, wrapped in bandages and connected to a dozen different tubes and monitors. She had been sitting there for 3 days. The doctor said he would survive, that humans were remarkably durable creatures, that his wounds would heal with time and proper care. They did not understand why the princess refused to leave. His side Seo-hyun did not try to explain. She read to him from books of Earth poetry that she had downloaded from the ship's database. Writers with names like Kim Sol and Yun Dongju. Poets who wrote about loss and longing and the beauty of fleeting things. She talked to him about her childhood, about the gardens of the palace where she used to hide from her tutors, about the first time she had seen the stars from orbit. She held his hand when the nightmares came, when he thrashed in his sleep and called out names she did not recognize, when his face twisted with the memory of a burning world on the 4th day. He woke, his eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they found her face. "Princess," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Seo-hyun," she corrected. He almost smiled. "Seo-hyun," he repeated. "How long was I asleep?" 4 days. "And you have been here the whole time?" She did not answer, which was answer enough. He looked at her, at the dark circles under her eyes, at the wrinkled gown she still wore from the battle. "You should rest." "I am fine." "You are exhausted." "I am fine," she repeated, more firmly this time. I was not ready to leave. Something passed between them in the silence, something unspoken but understood. Minjun did not push. 3 more days passed, and he grew stronger. And eventually, the doctors released him from the medical bay with strict instructions to rest. The ship was already on its way back to the Valorian homeworld, carrying news of the attack and the failed negotiations and the death of Rex. There would be consequences. Seo-hyun knew the Keth extremists had destroyed any chance of peace, and the Empire would demand answers and retribution. But she found that she did not care about politics anymore. She cared about the man who walked beside her through the crystalline corridors, still moving carefully because of his healing ribs. She cared about the way he looked at her, like she was something precious and worth protecting. She cared about the future, not the future of empires, but her own future, and what she wanted it to be on the day they arrived at the homeworld. She was summoned to the crystal throne. The Empress sat in her ancient seat, surrounded by advisors and courtiers, and her eyes were as cold and calculating as ever. "Daughter," she said, "you have survived an assassination attempt by Keth extremists. You have witnessed the failure of our peace negotiations, and you have returned home safely." "Yes, Mother. And now we must discuss the future," the Empress continued. "The Keth ambassador has been recalled in disgrace. His son is dead, and their empire teeters on the edge of civil war between the extremists and the loyalists. I am aware. In such unstable times, alliances become even more valuable," the Empress said. "The Solarian hegemony has expressed interest in a marriage alliance. Their crown prince is young and healthy, and their territory would provide us with a valuable buffer against Keth aggression." Seo-hyun felt the weight of the crown on her head. She thought about Rex, about the way he had looked at her like she was meat. She thought about the unnamed Solarian prince, who would probably look at her the same way. She thought about a life spent being traded from one master to another, a symbol instead of a person, a piece on the game board. And she thought about Minjun, standing at the back of the throne room with the other guards, watching her with eyes that saw her truly. "No," she said. The word fell into the silence like a stone into still water. "I beg your pardon," the Empress said, and her voice was dangerously quiet. "I said no," Seo-hyun repeated, and she reached up and removed the crown from her head. The courtiers gasped. The advisors whispered frantically. The Empress rose from her throne. "What do you think you are doing?" "I am laying down my crown," Xiaoyun said. And she walked up the steps to the throne and placed the delicate circlet on the council table beside her mother. "I will serve this empire as a diplomat, as a bridge builder, as whatever you need me to be. But I will not be sold. You would give up your place in the succession? I would give up being a piece on your game board." The Empress stared at her daughter for a long, terrible moment. Then she sat back down. "And if I refuse to accept this, then I will leave," Xiaoyun replied. "And you will have lost a daughter instead of a pawn." Mother and daughter faced each other across the crystal throne. And for the first time in her life, Xiaoyun did not look away. The Empress smiled. It was small and cold, but it was a smile. "You have grown teeth, my daughter," she said. "I wondered if you ever would." She waved her hand, and the courtiers and advisors filed out of the throne room, leaving only the two of them and the guards. "Sergeant Kang," the Empress said. "Come forward." Minjun walked to the base of the throne and bowed. Not the deep bow of a subject, but the respectful nod of a professional. "You saved my daughter's life," the Empress said. "You killed Rex of the Keth. You fought through an army of extremists to bring her home safely. I did my duty. Did you?" The Empress leaned forward. "Or did you do something else entirely?" Minjun did not answer. The Empress looked from him to Xiaoyun and back again, and something knowing flickered in her ancient eyes. "My daughter has never defied me before," she said. "She has never shown spine or spirit or fire. She has been the perfect princess, obedient and graceful and utterly empty." "Mother, be silent," the Empress commanded. "I am not finished." She turned back to Minjun. "Whatever you have done to her, whatever you have said, you have woken something inside her that I thought had died long ago. So I offer you a choice, Sergeant Kang." "What choice?" "You may take your payment and leave, return to your mercenary company. Find another contract on another world," the Empress said. "Or you may stay, permanently, as my daughter's official guardian." Xiaoyun felt her heart stop. Minjun looked at her. She looked back. "I will stay," he said. The Empress nodded. "I thought you might say that later." After the audience was over, Xiaoyun found Minjun in the palace gardens, standing beneath the ancient trees and looking up at the night sky. She walked to his side and stood there in silence. "You gave up your crown," he said eventually. "It was just a hat that let the rain in." He laughed, a real laugh, deep and warm. "You remembered. I remember everything you have said to me." He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that she had been afraid to name. "Xiaoyun," he said softly. "Yes? I am a soldier from a dead world, a man with nothing but scars and bad dreams. And you are a princess of the greatest empire in the galaxy. I am not a princess anymore. You will always be a princess to me." She reached out and took his hand, his scarred, rough warrior's hand, and she held it against her chest. "Will you stay?" she asked. "Not because my mother commands it, but because you want to?" "Yes," he said. "Not out of duty, but because some things are worth protecting." She smiled, and for the first time in her life, it was not a diplomatic mask or a political tool. It was just a smile, real and genuine and free. "Then stay," she said. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the night wind whispered through the crystal towers of the palace, the Earthborn soldier and the princess stood together in the garden, hand in hand. Her crown sat forgotten on a shelf somewhere, gathering dust. She did not miss its weight at all. The corridor ahead was blocked by flames, and the corridor behind was filled with the sound of Keth war chants. Xiaoyun pressed herself against the wall, her elegant diplomatic gown torn and stained with ash, her crown sitting crooked on her head. Minjun stood in front of her, a pistol in one hand and a knife in the other. She did not know where he had gotten a knife. "How many?" she asked. "6 in the group behind us," he replied. Two more coming from the maintenance shaft to our left, and at least one sniper covering the intersection ahead. You can tell all of that? I can hear them breathing. The Keth War chant grew louder, a deep rhythmic pounding that shook the floor beneath their feet. Can we go around? No, Minjin said. The explosion collapsed the secondary passages. This is the only route to the evacuation shuttles. Then what do we do? He looked at her, and his eyes were calm, almost peaceful. You stay behind me, he said, and when I tell you to run, you run. I will not leave you. Princess, my name is Xiao Yin, she interrupted. And I am not leaving you, so stop asking. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise perhaps, or admiration. Very well. Xiao Yun, he said, then stay close and do exactly what I tell you. The first Keth warrior came around the corner a moment later. He was massive. Nearly 8 feet tall, his gray skin covered in ritual scars. And he carried a plasma axe that crackled with deadly energy. Minjin shot him in the throat before he could take 2 steps. The warrior fell, choking on his own blood, and his companions roared with fury. They charged Seo Hyun had seen violence before, had watched recordings of battles and duels, but she had never witnessed anything like this. Minjin did not fight like a Valorian. He did not dance or flow or seek elegant solutions. He fought like a cornered animal, savage and brutal and utterly without mercy. A Keth warrior swung his plasma axe at Minjin's head, and Minjin ducked under it and drove his knife into the warrior's armpit, piercing the gap in his armor where the major artery ran. Blood sprayed across the corridor. Another warrior grabbed Minjun from behind, lifting him off the ground, and Minjun threw his head back, smashing it into the warrior's tusked face. The warrior dropped him with a howl of pain. Minjun spun, grabbed the warrior's own knife from his belt, and used it to open his throat in a single motion. 3 warriors down in less than 10 seconds. The remaining Keth hesitated. They looked at the humans standing among their fallen brothers, covered in blood, breathing hard but steady, and something like fear crept into their eyes. What are you? One of them demanded. I am human, Minjun replied, and I am having a very bad day. He attacked again. Seoing watched him move through the Keth warriors like a force of nature, taking wounds that should have dropped him, using every part of his body as a weapon, fighting with a ferocity that made the warrior race seem almost gentle by comparison. A blade caught him across the ribs. He grunted, but did not stop. A blunt impact struck his shoulder. He rolled with it and came up swinging. A warrior tried to grab his gun arm. Minjin broke the warrior's elbow with his knee, then used the screaming Keth as a shield against the other's human. One of the Keth snarled. You fight without honor. Honor is a luxury, Minjin replied. I fight to protect. He shot the Keth through the eye. The last 2 warriors fell back, clearly reconsidering their assault, and Minjin did not give them time to decide. He closed the distance in 3 long strides and put them down with brutal efficiency. Silence fell over the corridor. Seo Hyun stared at the carnage, at the bodies scattered across the floor, at the blood that painted the walls in abstract patterns of violence. We need to move, Minjin said. More will come. They ran. The station was dying around them, fires spreading, systems failing, bulkheads groaning under the stress of multiple explosions. They reached the main atrium just as the Valorian Royal Guard was being overwhelmed by a second wave of Keth extremists. Seo Hyun saw her bodyguards fall, one after another, their elegant combat styles no match for the savage fury of the attackers. And then she saw Vrex. He stood at the center of the carnage, his plasma axe dripping with Valorian blood, and his eyes found her across the chaos. There she is, he bellowed. My bride. He charged toward them. Minjun stepped in front of Seo Yun, raising his pistol, but the power cell was empty. Drained by the fighting in the corridor, he threw it aside and raised his knife. Vrex laughed. A human with a tiny blade against a Keth warrior. He sneered. This will be amusing. Wait, Seo Yun said, stepping forward. And she reached out with her mind. The Keth were not fully immune to telepathy like humans were. Their minds were guarded, but not impenetrable. And Seo Hyun had spent her entire life learning to manipulate and influence. She pushed into Rex's consciousness. Not to control him, but to distract him. Flooding his senses with false images and phantom sounds, Rex stumbled. Shaking his head in confusion, Minjun did not hesitate. He threw the knife. It buried itself in Rex's eye socket. And the Keth warrior crashed to the floor. Dead before he hit the ground. The remaining extremists stared in shock at their fallen leader. Run. Seo Yun screamed to the surviving Valorians. Get to the shuttles. They ran, and Minjin and Seo Hyun ran with them, fighting through the last pockets of resistance. Seo Yun using her telepathy to confuse and misdirect, while Minjun used his fists and borrowed weapons to clear their path. They reached the shuttle bay just as station security finally mounted an effective response. Keth loyalists and Valorian soldiers and neutral peacekeepers all working together to contain the extremist threat. The shuttle was cramped and crowded with survivors. And Seo Hyun found herself pressed against Minjin in the narrow space. She looked at him. Really looked at him. His face was battered and swollen. His body was covered in cuts and bruises. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage he had tied around his ribs. You are hurt, she said. I have been hurt worse. We need a medic. We need Seo Yun, he said softly, and she stopped. He reached out and gently adjusted her crown, which had somehow stayed on through all the fighting. You did well, he said. I use my telepathy as a weapon, she whispered. I have never done that before. You protected people, Minjin replied. That is nothing to be ashamed of. She looked at his hand, still raised near her face, and she took it in both of hers. Thank you, she said, for everything. I was just doing my job. No, Seon shook her head. You were doing much more than that. And we both know it. He did not argue, and when he finally collapsed from blood loss, she caught him in her arms and screamed for the medics. And she did not care who saw the tears streaming down her face, the princess and her bodyguard, holding each other in the chaos as the battle raged on around them. The Concordance station hung in the void between empires, a massive wheel of metal and glass that spun slowly against the backdrop of a dying star. It had been built 3 centuries ago as neutral ground, a place where enemies could meet without the threat of ambush, where treaties could be signed and alliances could be forged. Seo Yun had been trained for moments like this since she was old enough to speak. She knew every rule of diplomatic protocol, every subtle gesture and hidden meaning, every way to smile while delivering an insult. She was a weapon of words, and she had been sharpened to perfection. The negotiations began on the first day. The Keth wanted mining rights in the disputed systems along the border. The Valorians wanted assurances that Keth warships would stop raiding their merchant convoys. Both sides wanted things they could not have, and both sides pretended to offer things they would never give. So Yun sat beside the Valorian ambassador, an older male named Counselor Wan, and she played her part. She smiled at the Keth delegation. She laughed at their jokes. She pretended to consider their proposals with genuine interest. She was perfect, and she was exhausted on the 3rd day. Everything changed. The Keth ambassador made his proposal during the afternoon session, and the words hit Sion like a physical blow. A marriage alliance, the old warrior said, his voice rumbling through the conference room. To seal the peace between our peoples permanently. A marriage, Counselor Wan repeated carefully. Between whom? My son Rex has expressed great interest in the Princess Seo Hyun, the ambassador replied. She is of royal blood, is she not? 3rd in line for the crystal throne? Such a union would bind our empires together in ways that treaties alone cannot achieve. Seon felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Rex, who sat across the table with a satisfied smile on his tusked face. He was staring at her like she was a prize to be won. The princess is indeed of royal blood, Councillor Wan said slowly, and your proposal has merit. But such matters must be discussed with the Empress herself. Of course, the ambassador nodded. We would expect nothing less. The session ended shortly after. Seo Yoon walked back to her quarters on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. And she did not stop until she reached the small garden dome at the end of her corridor. It was a tiny space, barely 20 feet across, filled with artificial plants and a holographic sky that displayed the constellations of her homeworld. She sat on the stone bench in the center and stared up at fake stars. That was where Minjin found her. An hour later, he did not speak. He simply stood at the entrance to the dome, visible but not intrusive, giving her the choice of solitude or company. Seo Yoon did not know how long she sat there in silence. Finally, she spoke. On Earth, do they sell their daughters for peace treaties? Sometimes, Minjin replied. In the old days, it was common among the powerful. And now? Now it is considered barbaric by most humans, Seo Yoon laughed. But it was not a happy sound. How civilized of your species. Minjun walked into the dome and sat on the bench beside her, keeping a respectful distance between them. You do not want this marriage. What I want does not matter, Seo Yoon replied. I am a princess, and princesses exist to serve their empires. My mother has told me this since I was a child. I am a tool, a symbol, a piece on the great game board of galactic politics. That sounds lonely. Seo Yoon turned to look at him. His face was calm, his eyes gentle, and she saw no judgment there. Only understanding. Something cracked inside her. I am so tired, she whispered. And the words felt like a confession, like a secret she had been keeping even from herself. I am tired of smiling at people who see me as property. Tired of being graceful and elegant and perfect. Tired of wearing this crown like it means something, when all it really means is that I belong to someone else. The tears came without warning. She had not cried in years. Not since she was a child, because princesses did not cry. Princesses maintain composure at all times, but she was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. And she could not stop them. Minjun did not reach for her. He did not try to comfort her with touch. He simply sat beside her and waited. I do not want to marry him, Seo Yoon said through her tears. He looks at me like I am meat, like I am something to be consumed. And everyone acts like this is normal. Like my feelings do not matter at all. They matter to me, Minjin said quietly. Seo Yoon wiped her face with shaking hands. Why? Because you are a person, he replied. Not a symbol, not a tool, not a piece on a game board. You are a person with thoughts and feelings and dreams. And anyone who cannot see that is a fool. You hardly know me. I know enough, Minjin said. I know that you check on your handmaidens when they are sick. I know that you read poetry when you think no one is watching. I know that you saved the life of a kitchen servant last month by paying for her medical treatment out of your personal funds. Seo Yoon stared at him. How do you know that? I am your bodyguard, he replied simply. It is my job to know everything about your life. And based on that, you think I'm worth something? Based on that, I think you are worth everything. The words hung in the air between them. Seo Yoon felt something warm bloom in her chest. Something she had no name for. Something dangerous and wonderful and terrifying on Earth. Minjun continued. We have a saying about crowns. What is it? A crown is just a hat that lets the rain in. Seo Yoon blinked at him, and then she laughed. It was a real laugh, genuine and unguarded. The kind of laugh she had not experienced in years. Minjun smiled, just slightly, and the scars on his face shifted in ways that made him look almost handsome. That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. Seo-Yun said. Perhaps, he admitted. But it made you laugh. It did. They sat together in the artificial garden, watching the fake stars, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the explosions began. The first blast shook the entire station. Throwing Saiyin from the bench, Minjun caught her before she hit the ground. His reflexes faster than anything she had ever seen, and he pulled her against his chest as a second explosion tore through a nearby corridor. Alarms screamed through the station, emergency lights flashed red. Voices shouted in a dozen languages. Cath extremists, Minjun said, his voice calm despite the chaos. They have been planning this. How do you know? Because I can smell their blood wine in the ventilation system, he replied. They came here drunk on courage, which means they came here to die. Which means they do not intend to leave survivors. He grabbed her hand. We need to move. Now. And then they were running through the burning corridors of the Concordance station, hand in hand, as the peace they had come to build crumbled around them. The Imperial starship Eternal Chorus was the largest vessel in the Valorian fleet. A cathedral of crystal and light that carried 3,000 souls through the darkness between stars. Seo-Hyun had traveled on it many times before, but she had never noticed how small her private suite truly was until she had to share the corridor with a human. Minjun Kang had been assigned the cabin across from hers, a space meant for servants, and he had accepted it without complaint. 2 weeks had passed since he had saved her life. 2 weeks of silence and distance and professional courtesy. Seo-Yun told herself she was grateful for his discipline. But the truth was more complicated than that. She was bored. The journey to the Concordance station would take 12 days. And there was nothing to do but prepare for the treaty negotiations that awaited them. She read diplomatic briefings. Until her eyes ached, she practiced her speeches until she knew them by heart. She had tea with her ladies-in-waiting and listened to their gossip about the handsome young nobles back home, and every night she found herself standing at her window, watching the stars slide past, thinking about the scarred soldier in the cabin across the hall on the 5th day of the journey. She could not sleep. She paced her suite until the walls felt like a prison. And then she slipped out into the corridor and walked. The ship was quiet at this hour. Most of the crew and passengers were asleep, dreaming whatever dreams Valorians dreamed among the stars. Seo-Hyun wandered without direction, letting her feet carry her through the crystalline hallways, until she heard a sound that did not belong. It was rhythmic and harsh, a pattern of impacts and heavy breathing. She followed the sound down 3 levels to the cargo hold. The door was slightly open, and light spilled through the gap. Seo-Hyun pressed herself against the wall and looked inside. Minjun was training. He wore only loose pants, his scarred torso bare, and he was attacking a heavy bag that hung from the ceiling with fists and feet and elbows. The bag was made of reinforced polymer designed to withstand impacts from industrial equipment. He was making it swing with every strike. Seo-Hyun watched him move. She had seen Valorian martial artists perform their elegant dances of combat, all flowing grace and minimal effort. But this was different. This was brutal. Every strike was meant to hurt, to break, to end. There was no beauty in it, but there was a terrible efficiency that she could not look away from. He trained for an hour without stopping by the end. His body was covered in sweat, and his knuckles were bleeding again, and his breathing was ragged. He grabbed a towel and wiped his face. And then he turned toward the door. Seo-Hyun tried to slip away, but she was not fast enough. You can come in, princess, he said. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped through the door. How did you know I was there? I could smell your perfume, he replied. The flowers of your homeworld have a very distinctive scent. Seo-Hyun did not know what to say to that. She looked around the cargo hold At the improvised training equipment? At the hard metal floor? This is where you exercise every night. When I cannot sleep, yes. Why can you not sleep? The question came out before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted her curiosity. But Minjun did not seem offended. He sat down on a crate and drank water from a metal bottle. I have bad dreams, he said simply. Seo Hyun thought about pressing for more, but something in his voice told her that would be a mistake. Instead, she sat on a crate across from him and folded her hands in her lap. Why did you become a soldier? She asked. He was quiet for a long time. I was born on a colony world called New Bizon, he said finally. It was a farming planet at the edge of human space. 20 million people living in peace, growing food to feed the inner worlds. I have never heard of it. Most people have not, he replied. When I was 16, the Scourge incursion reached our sector, and the insectoid ships arrived without warning. And in 3 days, New Bizon was gone. Gone? Eaten, he said, his voice flat and empty. The Scourge consumed everything organic on the planet. Every plant, every animal, every person. And I survived only because I was on a school trip to an orbital station when the attack began. Seo Hyun stared at him. Your family? My mother, my father, my 2 sisters, my grandmother. He listed them like items on a report. I watched the ships from the observation deck. I saw the fires on the surface. I saw the planet turn from green to brown to gray in less than a week. I'm sorry. You did not do it. Still, Seo Hyun said, that is a terrible weight to carry. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt the full force of his attention for the first time. Why did you come down here, princess? I could not sleep either. Bad dreams? Seon thought about the knife in the darkness, about the poison that had killed her handmaiden, about the sniper's bullet that had passed close enough to her head that she had felt the wind of its passage. Yes, she admitted. Bad dreams. They sat in silence for a while. It was not uncomfortable on the 7th day of the journey. They attended a formal dinner with the Keth delegation that was traveling on a separate ship alongside them. The dinner was held in the grand ballroom of the Eternal Chorus, and Seo Hyun wore her finest gown and her most diplomatic smile. The Keth were warrior people, tall and powerful, with thick gray skin and tusks that curved up from their lower jaws. Their ambassador was ancient and cunning, but it was his son Vrex who caused the problems. Vrex was young and proud and eager to prove himself, and he had clearly been drinking the fermented blood wine that his people favored. I am curious about your pet, he said to Seo Hyun during the 3rd course, his voice loud enough for the entire table to hear. I do not understand your meaning. The human. Rex gestured toward Minjin, who stood against the wall with the other guards. I have heard stories about these creatures, about their Deathworld origins and their savage history, but I have never seen one in person. Sergeant Kang is my bodyguard. Seo Hyun replied carefully, not my pet. Is there a difference? Rex laughed, and several of the Keth officers laughed with him. Humans are barely civilized, everyone knows this. They eat the flesh of animals. They reproduce like vermin. They die of old age before they reach their 1st century. Seo Hyun glanced at Minjin. He stood perfectly still, his face expressionless, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. He gave no reaction at all. Rex noticed this and seemed disappointed. Perhaps he does not understand, the Keth warrior said. Their language skills are limited, I hear. He understands perfectly, Seo Hyun replied. He simply does not consider your words worth responding to. The table went silent. Rex's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Seo Hyun thought he might cause a scene. But his father placed a restraining hand on his arm. The dinner continued, tense and uncomfortable. Later that night, Seon found Minjin in the corridor outside her suite. Why did you not defend yourself? She asked. Against what? The insults, the mockery. Everything Rex said about your people. Minjin considered the question. Words are only weapons if you let them cut you, he said. I know what I am. I know what my people have survived. And I do not need the approval of a drunk warrior to feel secure in that knowledge. Seo Hyun studied his face. That is either very wise or very foolish. Perhaps both, he replied. And for the first time, she saw the ghost of a smile on his scarred features. She found herself smiling back, and somewhere in the depths of her carefully guarded heart, something shifted, something dangerous, something that felt almost like hope. The crystalline halls of the Valorian Palace had stood for 10,000 years, and in all that time, no human had ever walked through them until today. Princess Seon stood at the window of her private chambers, watching the soldier cross the courtyard below, and she felt something close to disgust rise in her throat. He moved wrong. Everything about him was wrong. The Valorians were tall and slender, built for grace and elegance, their bodies designed for a world of low gravity and gentle winds. But this human was compact and dense, his shoulders broad, his steps heavy against the crystal floor. She could hear him walking even from 3 floors above. Her mother, the Empress, had summoned her to the throne room. And Seo Yun knew why, because she had been told 3 days ago that a human bodyguard would be arriving. And she had spent those 3 days trying to change her mother's mind. It had not worked. Nothing ever worked against the Empress. Seo Yun adjusted her crown, a delicate thing of woven silver and blue gems that marked her as 3rd in line for the throne. And she made her way down to meet her fate. The throne room was vast and empty, except for 3 figures. A mother on the crystal throne, the Minister of Defense standing to her right, and the human standing at the base of the stairs. He did not kneel. Seo Hyun felt her eye twitch at this breach of protocol, but her mother seemed unbothered. So she said nothing and took her place beside the throne. Sergeant Minjun Kang of the Earthborn Legion, the Empress said, her voice like wind through chimes. You come highly recommended. I do my job. The human replied. His voice was deeper than Seo Hyun expected, rough like gravel. Nothing like the musical tones of Valorian speech. 3 assassination attempts in 2 months, the Empress continued. And our own security has failed to stop any of them before they reached my daughter's chambers. So I have looked beyond our borders for protection. I understand. Do you? The Empress leaned forward slightly, and Seo Yun felt the familiar pressure of her mother's telepathic presence brushing against her mind. My daughter is precious to this empire, Sergeant. And if she comes to harm under your watch, I will destroy your entire species. The human did not flinch. He did not react at all. I will keep her safe, he said simply, and that was that. The Empress waved her hand in dismissal. And Seo Yun found herself walking out of the throne room with a human soldier, following 3 steps behind her. She tried to read his mind. Every Valorian could sense the emotions of others, could push thoughts into unprotected minds, could manipulate and influence with nothing but mental pressure. But when Seo Hyun reached toward the human's consciousness, she found nothing but chaos, static, and noise and fractured images that made no sense. It was like trying to read a book that had been thrown into a fire. You are trying to enter my mind, the human said. Seo Hyun stopped walking. How did you know? I can feel the pressure, he replied. Humans cannot block telepathy naturally, but we have learned to make our thoughts unpleasant to read. And I apologize if what you found disturbed you. It did not disturb me, Seo Yun lied. And she continued walking. Her chambers were in the eastern tower of the palace. 17 rooms connected by archways of carved crystal. And she showed the human to the small room beside her main entrance. You will stay here, she told him. You will not enter my private rooms without permission. You will not speak to me unless I address you first. And you will not embarrass me in front of the court. Understood. She waited for him to say something else. to argue or complain or make some crude human comment. But he simply stood there, his scarred face unreadable, his dark eyes steady. "Good," she said finally. And she retreated to her bedroom that night. Seon could not sleep. She lay in her bed of woven starlight, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the 3 assassination attempts that had nearly claimed her life. The first had been poison in her evening tea, caught only because her handmaiden had tasted it first and died in Seo Yoon's arms. The second had been a knife in the darkness, stopped only because Seo Yoon had woken from a nightmare at exactly the right moment and screamed for the guards. The third had been a sniper from a building half a mile away, foiled only because the wind had shifted at the last second. 3 attempts, 3 moments of pure luck. She was running out of luck. A sound from the outer room made her sit up. It was soft, barely audible. The whisper of fabric against crystal. Seon opened her mouth to call for the guards. But before she could make a sound, her bedroom door slid open and the human stepped inside. "Stay down," he said quietly. She wanted to argue, wanted to demand how he dared enter her room. But something in his voice stopped her. He moved across her bedroom like a shadow, silent despite his heavy build. And he stopped beside the window that overlooked the garden. Seon watched him in the darkness. He did not move for a long time then. Without warning, he smashed his fist through the crystal window and grabbed something on the other side. There was a scream, high and thin, and the human pulled a figure through the broken window and threw it to the floor. It was a Valorian, dressed in the black silk of the assassin guilds, and there was a blade in his hand that glowed with poison. The human stepped on the assassin's wrist, and the blade fell free. "4th attempt," the human said, looking at Seon. "Your palace security did not detect him climbing the tower, but I heard him when he reached the window." "You heard him?" Seon stared at the assassin, then at the human. "That is impossible." He would have been completely silent. "Humans evolved on a world full of predators," the human replied. "We learned to hear things that wanted to stay quiet, because if we did not hear them, we died." The palace guards arrived moments later, summoned by the sound of breaking crystal, and they took the assassin away for questioning. Seo Yoon stood in the middle of her bedroom, surrounded by broken glass and chaos. And she looked at the human who had saved her life. "You are injured," she said. He glanced at his hand, which was bleeding from a dozen cuts where he had punched through the window. "It is nothing. Let me call a healer." "That is not necessary." "Princess." He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a small tube, and he squeezed clear gel onto his wounds without any change in his expression. Seo Hyun watched his face. He did not wince. He did not show any sign of pain at all. "Why did you take this job?" she asked suddenly. "Guarding a foreign princess in a palace that considers you barely more than an animal." The human looked at her for a long moment. "Because protecting people is what I do," he said. "It is all I have left." And then he walked back to his small room beside her entrance and closed the door. Seo Hyun stood alone in her broken bedroom. And for the first time since the assassination attempts began, she felt something other than fear. She felt curious. Who was this human who heard assassins in the darkness and bled without complaint? She wanted to know, and that wanting frightened her more than any knife in the night.